What is the thing we don't talk about in your family? Apparently our dad had another kid about 8 years older than me. My mom blurted something about it after their divorce when she was pissed about something. It was along the lines of, if he thinks he can forget you exist like that other kid of his. She then turned very white and I was never able to get more out of her than that. My dad pretends he doesn't know what I'm talking about but has apparently told my brother a bit of the story and then backtracked and never talked about it again. So yeah, apparently I'm not the oldest. Clearly mom never forgot. That kid might actually appreciate knowing that his bio dad's wife acknowledges he exists. I know I would. At least then someone in that entire family would, so that maybe, just maybe, I could meet my siblings one day. My sister pretended to be me when she got arrested. Joke's on her. She paid the fine and when it was found they didn't follow proper procedure they refunded the fine to me. Karma. My dad's cousin tried to give my dad's name when he got arrested because he had a warrant. It turned out my dad had a warrant too, so he got arrested anyway. The fact that my cousin got kidnapped when he was a baby. Long story short, 2 young teenagers got knocked up, got married, aunt wanted a divorce but husband was abusive and manipulative, and she fled out of state back to us, her family. He followed her to try to talk it out. She let him inside to talk. He took my baby cousin who was sleeping in her arms and fled out of state. Then he took her to court for abandoning her child and refused to let her see him. 20 years later, my cousin seeks us out and we all reconnect. Thanksgiving dinners are great, but we don't talk about that whole ordeal. A slightly happier story than most here. A few years ago, my sister and I reconnected after not seeing each other for 10 plus years. The split was due to our parents' divorce being an absolute shitstorm. Neither of us has any desire to reboot what wasn't our fight to begin with, so we just don't bring it up. That New Year's Eve when my mom tried to commit suicide by swallowing a BJNCH of antidepressive pills. For years everyone has acted like it didn't happen. She doesn't want to talk about it. Both she and I saw therapists for it. Almost the same thing happened to me. My mom swallowed a ton of sleeping pills and we had to rush her to the hospital. Later, when she got out of counseling or whatever, she and a few other family members said it was basically my brother and I that caused it and had almost killed her. I was 11 and my brother was 8. When I was growing up, I always heard stories about my dad as a kid hanging out in his mom's tavern. The first time we visited his hometown, he showed us his house, which is on a crossroads and split level. Front door goes to the top floor. Basement, or lower floor, opens out the back, which has a small road parking area, and that's where the tavern was. It wasn't until many years later that it dawned on me that my dad grew up during Prohibition. Grandma was a bootlegger. It gets better. His hometown is on a road that was considered a bootlegger's highway from Canada. He went through jump school in the same class as Henry Hill, whose life Goodfellas was based on. One night in my teens, a friend of his, who I'd never heard of, knocked on the door at 10 p.m. He and his 2 buddies, all Italian, wanted a place to sleep for the night. They were gone in the morning. His pension and the work he did after he retired couldn't possibly explain our lifestyle. Mom has forbidden me from digging into it any further. Dad's second wife, a straight psycho who systematically poisoned every relationship he had until she was it, and the abuse we endured that she convinced him wasn't happening because we were all just acting out. Now he's dying and everyone's so weepy, but he was given 6 weeks to live 3.5 years ago, and was living symptom free for most of that time. I can't mourn because I feel like he's dead to me because I was dead to him when I was 11. I already mourned. My wedding day. It was a 6-month marriage to an emotionally abusive woman that ended with infidelity, depression, and homelessness. I'm totally fine now, but I don't ever mention it, so no one else does. My grandpa has brought the wedding up a couple of times for necessary reasons, but refers to it as that time we met you in the park. That's such a sweet grandpa thing to call it. My grandfather's brother was a priest when he was younger. His wife of 40 plus years used to be a nun. Their first child was born a few months after they left. No bishop fucker name. Sister left vows is just getting fat. The fact that my uncle is very likely schizophrenic, but since he thinks the voices he hears are from heaven, and the creatures he sees are from heck, We just say he is pious. My aunt does the same thing. Follows every voice and anything they say because it's God. My sister's bio dad. We all know she's our half sibling and that our dad isn't her dad, but we never talk about it. None of us know who he is or if he ever paid child support or if our sister knows him. Nothing. And I'm sure none of us will ever bring it up. Bro, I looked at your history because I was certain I stumbled upon one of my siblings' accounts. This is my exact situation, but I'm the odd one out and it's never brought up too. That my parents died from AIDS in the early 90s when I was 2. Growing up I never knew how my mother died, and I was told my father just disappeared. I remember throwing a tantrum in middle school for wanting to know what really happened to my parents. My aunt finally told me the truth. Well, more yelled at me about it. I remember crying alone in my room for hours. I'm pretty sure their death was the starting point for how strange my family is. Anyhow, my family hasn't mentioned it since then and I'm now 27. As far as I know, we've never said the words HIV or AIDS aloud in my family. If it must be talked about, it's that disease or something similar. My friends constantly wonder why I never mention my parents and I still have hang-ups telling people how they passed away. It makes me feel so conflicted inside because I know I should have nothing to feel ashamed of, but my family and society makes me feel my parents' deaths should be swept under the rug. My grandfather remarried a woman who almost immediately developed Alzheimer's and forgot who he is. He is now dating his first wife while his actual wife is confused who anyone is. He refuses to divorce because the scumbag family of his second wife bailed when they saw how expensive she was going to be. And my family had to get her care because she was too much for my grandfather to take care of. He is almost 90. I called out the relevant members of her family for bailing and was told I was being rude, which might be true. But I'm also freaking right. My dad selling off his Enron stock before the scandal broke and the company collapsed. He got sick of everyone saying looks like you dodged a bullet there, so now we all just keep our mouths shut about his good timing. To be fair, though, there were a lot of warning signs. If I recall correctly, there were even a few articles published in some of the trade journals that flatly said that Enron's profits were completely imaginary. Maybe your dad was just smart instead of suspiciously lucky. My uber Catholic grandparents met when my grandpa was married. He left his wife. My grandmother got pregnant and they eloped in the 40s. My grandma was 18 and my grandpa was 27. He took her to her senior prom. No one knew about this until last year, and my uncle was born early. Apparently no one in my family can do math and never added up the birth and marriage dates. My uncle and his friend who's been around since I have memory, almost 30 years. They've never had a female companion. They live together. Dang, they even owned a gay bar at some point. Very Catholic family, so that's probably why they never came out. I thought it was something they kept from us the kids all these years until I had the courage to ask my dad, and he said that's never been discussed, that he has never even asked my mom about it. That seem happy and travel all the time, so that's awesome. I just wish they could just be who they are around their loved ones. My mom's aunt also had a female roommate that she lived with for 30 years. When we were little we called her Aunt Carol, but no one will acknowledge that they were gay. I thought it was that my aunt was hardcore into drugs. Turns out nobody knew. To be fair, I didn't know per se, but it was so obvious that I thought everybody knew but didn't mention it. My family was blown away when she got busted going to Florida to buy pills so she could resell them here. I was like, yeah, duh. Reminds me of my cousin's ex-wife. She always looked zonked out and worked at a nursing home, so I figured she was stealing meds. Everyone was super confused after she collapsed at my other cousin's wedding after having a few drinks. Apparently she had a lot of painkillers in her system. The numerous suicides. It's finally getting to the point where they admit that these people even existed, let alone died. One of my great uncles killed himself before I was born, and if not for all the group photos and my great aunt being a decent human, I wouldn't have ever known his name. My mom likes to pretend they died in car accidents or heart attacks. It made for some real confusion once I got older. Huntington's disease. My grandpa died from it. My uncle is getting worse and worse, and my niece and nephew have 50% to get it. We all pretend it isn't there because it's difficult to talk about, especially since my grandma is still alive. She knows how it will be. that my grandfather, on my dad's side, was the only one to accept my oldest brother when he came into the picture. My dad married my mom when my brother was 3, long before I came along, and everyone looked at him like a nobody and told my dad that my mother was a W. That our father lied to our family about everything, where he grew up, lived, militarily background, other family, jobs. We found out after he died, and never spoke of it again. It's been 10 years since he died. My great uncle was a priest, or whatever they are called in the Syrian Orthodox Church, and he was a pedophile. He was kicked out of the church after my uncle admitted he was molested by him. I was always told by my family that my biological grandfather on mom's side died in a rock climbing accident right before mom was born. I found out last year that what actually happened was, while he was still attending a military college in the South in the 60s, my grandmother discovered that he liked to wear women's clothing after finding a box of dresses in his size in his closet. The next day, she came back to find him hanging from the ceiling, and she and 2 of her brothers had to smuggle his body out of the room and convince a coroner to rule it an accident. I'm honestly not even sure of who all in the family knows the truth, but anyone who does sure as heck doesn't talk about it. It was Thanksgiving. My parents had recently returned from Hawaii. My dad wanted to show everyone the photos. He connected the digital camera to the giant flat screen TV and started up a slideshow of my mother, naked, in their bedroom. He scrolled through several and then quickly turned it off and said, "Whoops, wrong cartridge." I was 21 and my boyfriend was with me for the holidays for the first time. My mom started crying. My boyfriend went silent. I just said, "Oh my god, somehow my 100-year-old grandma missed the whole thing." We never speak of it. If it is brought up, my mother will yell we swore to never mention that and get red-faced. That is so hilarious. My sister found some naked pics of my mom too. She freaked, put them back and ran away. Okay, to break the chain of secret girlfriends and estranged relatives, my family does not talk about cottage cheese. I can tell you want to hear more about this. For that we must start at the beginning. My father is a lover of all things dairy. He would drink so much milk as a child his mother would tell him you either have to become a dairy farmer or marry a farmer's daughter. And dear dad did just that when he and my mom tied the knot. Dad also loves cheese, solid cheese, soft cheese, and cottage cheese. Dad is, however, very squeamish. He cannot stand the sight or thought of blood, body fluids or cheese curds. This makes enjoying his cottage cheese, by the quart, difficult. No one is allowed to talk about cheese, curds, whey, or how it is all made when he is enjoying his snack. If you make the mistake of mentioning any of these things, Dad ends the conversations by throwing his hands in the air and yelling, "We don't talk about that." My mother's mental and physical abuse of both me and my sister during our childhoods. Can't talk about it with her because the conversation never goes anywhere. Same crap every time I try to bring it up to get the smallest bit of closure. That never happened turns to, well, if it happened it didn't happen like that, to, well, if it happened like that then you provoked me and it's all your fault. On a certain level she believes she genuinely was not abusive because what she did to me was much more mild than the even more abusive upbringing she had herself, and she thinks the fact that she did better means she did good. Can't talk about it with my sister because she's much older than I am and got the frick out of the house the second she could. Not that I blame her, and wrote off the entire family, not only my mom but also me and everyone else. And I've never had any relationship with her and have been rebuffed when I've tried to reach out. Can't talk about it with extended family because my mother never did anything in front of them and I'm a perpetual freak up, so I have zero credibility. Tried talking to an aunt I used to be close to about it once and she scolded me for making up stories and immediately told my mother what I had said. I knew that if she didn't believe me none of the rest of them would and never tried again. Sounds like the narcissist's prayer. That didn't happen. And if it did, it wasn't that bad. And if it was, that's not a big deal. And if it is, that's not my fault. And if it was, I didn't mean it. And if I did, you deserve it. My dad never talks about his sister. She stole thousands from her father, fled to New Mexico, and is now hosting my great uncle and waiting for him to die so she can claim his belongings. I don't know if he's actually going to will anything to her, but she seems certain. I haven't seen my aunt in over a decade, but she's a real piece of work. My mom complains about it a lot, but the rest of her family doesn't really like to admit that they don't talk to her much. There was some big drama years ago where they fought over mom's parenting. This was largely because of me, and since then my mom's sister and parents rarely speak to her. My family also refuses to talk about or acknowledge my parents' disciplinary methods, which involved taking one of us unruly children, throwing us in a tub of cold water and dunking our heads under it repeatedly while yelling at us. They did this for years anytime one of us got seriously out of line. They also once force-fed my sister mustard because she hates it. Maybe you can see why my relatives disagreed with mom's parenting. That abuse is unconscionable. The family needed to call CPS and or try to get custody. I'm sorry you had crappy parents. A lot of people in my family are alcoholics. It's okay to acknowledge that they drink a lot, but it's not okay to call them alcoholics, even when they do things like routinely pass out on their front lawn, getting a huge number of DUIs, drinking so much Labatt that the company sends them a flag and a lawn chair, getting fired from Fabricland for drunkenly screaming at customers then barfing on a quilt, or getting pulled over on a motorized beer cooler by the RCMP. All those incidents can be discussed so long as no one mentions alcoholism. When I was about 5 years old, my mom, grandma, brother and I were about an hour from home, and we stopped to get gas. We went inside to pay, but we were 13 cents short. My mom told the clerk, "Be right back, I'll go get it from the car." So we all go back to the car, and my mom hands me 13 cents and asks me to go pay the clerk. I go inside and by now a line has formed. I waited in line, not realizing that I probably would have been fine to just go up to the front to just hand him the money. When I finally finished, I walk outside and I could see our minivan driving away. My family was nowhere to be found. They'd left without me, in an unfamiliar neighborhood, 50 miles from home. I got scared, but I can remember feeling like, surely this isn't as abnormal as it feels. They'll be right back. Right, so I began to cry, and I walked over and sat on a concrete slab next to the gas station. I'm not sure how long it was, but at least several minutes later I finally saw the van returning. When they pulled up, my mom was bawling and she began hugging and kissing me and apologizing. Apparently what happened was my brother, 7-year-old, closed the heavy sliding door and my mom, hearing that sound, assumed it was after I'd crawled back in, so she started to drive away. After all, how long could it take me to deliver 13 cents? The story definitely makes my mother look pretty bad, but because I was so young when it happened, and it was so out of character for her, I was never really mad at her. So for the next 15 years or so, we'd tell people that story and kinda laugh about it. My mom would laugh, too. Turns out, her laughter was forced. It tore her up inside anytime we talked about it. She finally confessed to us how it made her feel, and we all just sorta agreed to never bring it up again. We weren't mad at her. We'd totally forgiven her for her mistake, and made sure she knew that, but she was never able to forgive herself. She's still around and is an amazing mother. We just never tell that story anymore. The story definitely makes my mother look pretty bad, only to people online who pretend to be perfect parents. Stuff like this happens because it's really hard to be hyper vigilant 24 hours a day. How's there's negative downtime between all my brother's girlfriends? Negative downtime. Stealing this idiom for future conversations. Thanks. The fact that my dad thinks he has a fourth kid out there somewhere from before my parents were married, but he isn't entirely sure. I could have a brother in his 30s out there somewhere and there's a good chance I'll never find out. My uncle's brother tried to molest me and it was blamed on our culture. Oh, he just thinks you're cute, but grabbing a 10-year-old female who doesn't even know your name is not cute. As of recent, my mom telling me that my brother and his wife can't ever get divorced because divorce isn't in our religion. Her parents are divorced. Same religion. Sister-in-law has one of my parents' credit cards. She used to use it to go do the grocery shopping for parents. Well, now she uses it to buy groceries for her family. She and my brother are financially well off, My brother isn't aware that she is spending $400 to $500 per month on the card. I told my parents they should confront her and tell my brother, but they are too scared that she will get mad and refuse to bring their grandchildren around. I offered to cancel their card or confront for them, but they told me to stay out of it. I try to honor their wishes, but it sure is awkward when I'm around my brother. TLDR, sister-in-law regularly steals money from my parents, but they refuse to say anything or let anyone else say anything. When my younger brother literally kicked my butt during a fit because I stopped him from hitting our younger sister. He has a few mental and behavioral issues and clearly it was my fault and I have no right to be upset about it. S. My great-grandfather was a member of the Nazi Party. Oddly enough, my grandma, his daughter, is the coolest, most tolerant banana in the bunch. My grandmother's family came to the US from Germany and often wrote letters back and forth. There are albums full of these things, along with pictures they exchanged, but for a period in the 40s there is almost nothing except for a few more generic notes thanking them for prayers etc. and a crap ton of allusions to other, longer missives that have disappeared. My father, unless I've done something my mom doesn't like, then she can't wait to pull out the "you're just like your father." Side note, my dad is awesome, so secretly I take this as a compliment. In the 15 years since their amicable but painful divorce, I literally cannot bring up my dad around my mom without her talking bad about him. Meanwhile, he has not once ever said an unkind thing about her or my stepdad. My mother-in-law won't tell my wife who my wife's biological father was. Even to this day, my wife is almost 50 and her mother is quickly approaching 70. Their relationship was strained for years because my wife's mother was an absentee mother. Now their relationship is better than ever, but my mother-in-law still won't say. It has caused my wife a lifetime of unnecessary grief. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.